Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we are the IB English guys. This is video number 6 in our series where we're looking at writing a paper 2, looking at 2 stories, stones, and a family supper. And now we're going to do the introduction.
It's about time we finally did some writing, right? Folks, so far we've done graphic organizers for both stories. We've done a comparative organizer. We broke down the question. What else did we do?
We wrote a strong comparative thesis.
And we made a rudimentary outline.
Yeah, and now it's time for the handshake. Shout out to Connor Duffy. He likes to call the introduction the handshake.
It's a good way to start because you want to have this good, firm handshake. You want to look your reader in the eye and say, hey, I'm here. I mean business. I know what I'm talking about today.
Yeah,
Giles,
absolutely.
What do you say? I think the best way to approach this would be simply to read the introduction that the student has written for these 2 texts. And then we can talk about what we see and talk about the elements we'd like you to include in your introduction.
That's a great idea. Before we do that, let's just remember that we're talking about the question about the struggle to be understood. How do two writers portray the struggle to be understood? This was our question we were trying to tackle.
And we remember the how has to talk about the authorial choice. We talked about the word struggle linking to conflict, and we talked about understood in a myriad of ways to interpret this question.
That's right.
So here's the introduction that the student wrote. Go get him, Mr. Giles.
Okay. Ready?
Yep.
It is no secret that many males struggle to express their emotions and thus struggle to be truly understood. Cultural norms for masculinity sometimes inhibit males from truly expressing themselves and sharing their inner thoughts and feelings with others. The real victims many times are other family members. A Family Supper by Kazuo Ishiguro is the story of a rather disjointed family with the son who comes back from his stay in the USA to visit his rather distant and emotionally cut off father. The father in this story clearly struggles to share his affection for his family and his desire to have the family together and intact. In Stones by Timothy Finley, a young father comes back from war a coward, having failed to act in the line of fire. His torment and shame and his inability to clearly express his true feelings and receive treatment for his trauma are the subjects of this heartbreaking story. While the circumstances of their struggles are vastly different, the 2 fathers in A Family Supper and Stones both struggle to articulate their feelings and cope with their emotions. This struggle has dire consequences for the family dynamic, and in both cases results in fragmentation and discord. Wow.
Mr. Giles, now, I think between the 2 of us, we read about 1,000 paper 2s in the last examination session, and if I see this introduction as an examiner, I know immediately this student is in great shape. What makes me say that?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One is I think it's very strong writing. 2, I think there's a really strong focus on the question and really some deep thought about the question.
Yeah, and we like to think about rich ideas. What we'd like to do right now is pop this same paragraph on the screen for you now. This time you'll notice that it's highlighted. And what Mr. Giles and I would like to do right now is talk about the various parts we see in this introduction and encourage you to include these in your introduction as well. Mr. Giles, the first thing I notice is some blue highlighting there at the beginning of the paragraph. Why did we highlight that blue, and what can you say about that?
This is what we call the hook, and I know this is a controversial idea, but I personally like it when a student is actually doing some critical thinking about the question. So in this case, the blue are those ideas about the struggle to be understood. It's interesting that we're actually talking about masculine, males, and the inability of males to express their emotions. And again, we got the wording of the question in the beginning.
Yeah, it's really important to keep your eye on those words of the question or use synonyms because that will alert your examiner that you are focused, and that's a very important part for criterion C.
The hook is not some trite cliche. It's actually saying something. It's showing some thinking.
Yeah, it's not a rhetorical question. Do you suffer from expressing yourself? It's saying much more than that. It's rich, it's articulate, and it's rooted in very rich ideas.
I like it's no secret that. That's a nice little opening.
Yeah, anyway, we could keep going. Turn of phrase, as my friend would say.
Yeah, right.
The next thing I noticed, Mr. Giles, is an orange section, and that you can see that highlighted there. This is where we encourage our students to briefly summarize both texts, and I do mean briefly, 1 or 2 sentences, with an eye
on the question.
Thank you, Mr. Giles. Talk about that with an eye on the question.
Well, yeah, you're thinking about the struggle to be understood, but you also need to do a little legwork so that you explain the sort of main sort of circumstances of this particular text you're writing about, why do you want to do some summary work in the beginning?
Well, it's really helpful for the examiner. It might be an unfamiliar text. You're quickly rooting them in the work and sort of the lens, the angle that you're approaching with respect to the question. It's just an integral part of the introduction. You must briefly and concisely summarize both texts.
I recommend practicing writing those kind of overarching summaries of your literary text. It's actually a really good skill to learn how to do.
Yeah.
Can you summarize the sort of gist of your novel or your play or your text in a sentence?
Actually, Mr. Giles, that's a skill we visit in every unit we teach, that ability to very clearly and concisely summarize a text. Teachers, make sure your kids are practicing that so that flows out very nicely when they get to their actual paper too. Giles, that we see the thesis is in bold type, and I do see some green and some red. Why don't you go ahead and talk about one of those colors and what you notice?
Yeah, so the green is that kind of wording of the question, the idea of struggle is emphasized in that case, and I think that's really important. I also noticed that we have these comparative phrases, while and both. These are comparative words. So we're already got our comparative hat on, and we're writing a comparative essay, so we need a comparative thesis.
Yeah, no, I guess this is something I'd like to talk about as an examiner, because oftentimes we see students loading up 3 authorial choices, sort of outlining the choices they'd like to talk about in the paper. However, Mr. Giles and I don't really subscribe to that approach. Talk about the red and how that links to the body of the paper, Mr. Giles, that pink highlighting.
Okay, so we're thinking about, again, part of our paper is going to be that inability to express their feelings and to cope with their emotions. But again, we're going to think about the consequences of that. So the pink are the sort of rich ideas that we're thinking about in terms of comparing these two texts.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the rich ideas that these respective authors had. Then we're going to pick up the how. How do they show those rich ideas through the actual body paragraphs? But we want to have those rich ideas in the thesis, those rich ideas as topic sentences, then go to the broad authorial choices and illustrate by example how those broad authorial choices reinforce those pink rich ideas.
Yeah, we're going to talk about characterization, we're going to talk about symbolism, and we're going to talk about the endings and the conclusions.
However,
those
are broad choices, but I may add some other choices as well. Hence my decision not to just list those 3 choices, because as I'm writing, I may deviate and go out into other choices.
Yeah, well,
I want to focus on the idea, not the choice.
Yeah.
I want to focus on, this is my rich idea, and these choices inform this idea.
I like it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So folks, what we'd like you to do now, you'll notice that we have a graphic organizer in the video description. And in this graphic organizer, you'll see a box for your hook. You'll see 2 boxes for your short summaries. You'll see a space for sort of your bridge statement, your transition to the final thesis. So go ahead and give that a try. Highlight your work and see if you can include all those elements as well. We think if you can, that you'll be off and running to a fantastic paper too. Stay with this series, because next we're going to show you how to write the body paragraphs. Remember, your writing's beside us. We went today, we showed you an introduction. Now you go. You write your introduction for your 2 texts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for some body paragraphs.
Good luck, guys.